The year is 1776, and the 13 colonies live within a web that reaches across oceans and into quiet rooms, linking a Philadelphia counting house to a Canton warehouse, a Scottish press to a Virginia meeting house, and a Devon shipyard to a Boston wharf. It is important to remember that governance is not only decrees and drums, it is mornings that start on time, payments that clear, and clerks who know which drawer holds which seal. In this year, a steady shift turns private routines into public order. Assemblies seat themselves with familiar motions. Oaths are adjusted with a single word removed, and yet the meaning rests differently on the tongue. Paper turns into promise. The slow advance happens in kitchens where bread is cut with the same knife as yesterday, and in workshops where tools move from hand to hand. What changes is the direction of attention, away from a distant crown and toward nearby chairs, signatures, and schedules. We will trace that attention as it realigns. The invisible rules of exchange, described in fresh pages from across the Atlantic, invite a new confidence that ordinary choices add up to something coherent. Silver pulled from mountains far to the south continues its round-the-world journey, touching China, Spain, and the coastal towns of North America, letting trust flow as softly as coin. Ships move with the rhythm of weather, and news arrives like a tide, too slow to rush and too strong to stop. Instruments and maps refine the edges of uncertainty until routes feel less like chance and more like reliable threads. In brief vignettes, we step into parlors, studies, and counting rooms, touching the small levers that tip a year. We anchor to careful records preserved by libraries and archives, where ink holds memory in place. The outline of independence forms not as a single stroke, but as a constellation that glows when observed together. The river runs quietly, and those who stand along its banks find that they have already crossed to the other side. Settle in as we drift back to a Scottish printer's shop, where fresh signatures lie stacked to dry. A thick volume, careful and plain, begins to find its way into hands that weigh choices for a living. The wealth of nations appears in the same world that counts barrels of flour and measures nails by the pound. The argument inside it is simple in feeling, though deep in its reach. When people are free to choose, their separate decisions can align like geese on a long migration, guided not by orders, but by currents of habit, need, and price. In the quiet unfolding, the invisible hand is less a flourish and more a sedative rhythm. It tells merchants that they do not need a trumpet to coordinate. They need fair weights, open stalls, and a sense that tomorrow will resemble today closely enough to be planned. The stakes are not abstract. They are bread, wages, and trust. If a barrel is short, a week's meal's thin. If a price is wrong, a partnership buckles. If policy fixes what habit already balances, a line outside a shop lengthens for no good reason. Moving slowly forward in time, we find copies of the book leaving Edinburgh, crossing channels, then oceans, smuggled into conversations through pamphlets and reviews. Printers extract passages, paraphrase arguments, and set them beside familiar news of cargo lists and exchange rates. The idea travels not as a proclamation, but as a quiet permission. Let people negotiate and watch how the many small bargains resolve into supply where it is needed. In a port town, a shopkeeper reads a borrowed page by the window and feels something loosen. as if a parent has stopped hovering over the family table. To truly understand this shift, we must first consider how price feels in the hand. A clerk, sleeves rolled, compares two offers for molasses. He does not consult a distant official. He talks with a carter who knows the roads and with a baker who knows the week's orders. The number they settle on is not just arithmetic, it is memory, weather, and trust, captured in a single figure that will be tested by the next delivery. The invisible hand is present here as calm expectation that no one needs to tell the city to eat. The city will keep itself alive by 1,000 small trades. Guild rules, tariffs, and monopolies do not vanish in a puff, but they are now viewed through a different lens. If a restriction keeps a price high while a ship waits in the harbour with cheaper goods aboard, the logic is questioned at the counter as much as in a pamphlet. The conversation moves like breath from cellars to assemblies. Why must the price remain heavy if the market tries to lighten it?
People do not carry this as rebellion. They carry it as common sense, the way one adjusts a chair to sit more comfortably.
What nobody knew at the time was how much comfort this thought would lend to a society drifting away from imperial supervision. In the absence of swift directives, the colonies learn to trust their own patterns. They already have the habits that carry food into kitchens and cloth onto shoulders. The invisible hand tells them that removing one set of stamps and replacing them with another will not stop the flow, provided that everyone involved can still see where the line begins and ends. In the aftermath of disruptions, markets find workarounds. Credit extended by a neighbor, a substituted cloth, a delayed purchase that becomes a small saving. Meanwhile, across the continent of ideas, letters move between merchants and ministers, debating how much rule is necessary to keep the gears meshed without grinding. The tone is not shout and clash, but careful and patient. A customs office delays a shipment. A pamphlet suggests that the blockage costs more than the revenue gained. A warehouse fills, and then it empties when a duty is lifted. A ledger notices before a legislator does. This is the place where theory meets bread, where a mother chooses a cheaper candle and calls it prudence rather than sacrifice. This was the moment everything changed in feeling, though not at once in law. The confidence to rely on ordinary exchange began to support the broader courage to rely on ordinary people for governance. If a neighborhood can coordinate on price and delivery, perhaps a town can coordinate on tax and repair. If trust can pass across a counter with a nod, perhaps it can pass in an election with the same steady hands. The invisible hand hums beneath the surface of politics, suggesting that the most reliable order is the one sustained by habit. Let us consider the texture of those habits. A shopkeeper's inventory lists pins, needles, tea, soap, and sugar, each line attended by a memory of which neighbor prefers which brand, who pays at the end of the month, who pays in kind. Prices are not slogans, they are instructions for motion. Lower the price and more feet arrive at the door. Raise it and feet stay home. Across a square, another shopkeeper watches, adjusts, and the two together keep the town supplied without a meeting. That subtle choreography becomes a comfort greater than any distant assurance. In quiet summary, the invisible hand offered a lullaby for a restless economy. It told people who feared disorder that order could arise from ordinary care. It suggested that bread would still be baked, cloth still woven, and ships still loaded, even if official lines blurred for a time. While debates about empire and rights gathered in halls, the daily exchange of goods and promises convinced many that life could remain steady. As we move forward, we will see how this calm expectation intersects with silver moving through the world's markets and with ships carrying both goods and news, each current reinforcing the other in the slow unfolding of independence. Moving slowly forward in time, we find silver leaving a cold mountain where breath is thin and hammers ring with a steady patience. In the Andean heights near Potosi, ore is lifted, ground and washed, then drawn into bars that reflect the pale light like quiet water. The metal is stamped, counted and sent downhill on the backs of mules, then loaded onto ships that follow currents as old as the wind. The journey will take it through Spanish ports, across oceans, and into hands that do not share a language, but do share a trust in weight, assay, and edge. It is important to remember what silver meant. Reliable coin steadies a bargain. When a coin is known, measured, and milled, strangers can agree without a second meeting. Spanish dollars, clipped to prevent shaving, carry seals that promise consistency, and those promises become bridges between people who will never greet each other. The stakes are close to the hearth. A missing ounce means fewer candles. A false coin means a broken plan. And a shortage of coin means credit stretched until tempers fray. Reliable money keeps voices low because it turns uncertainty into arithmetic. Meanwhile, across the Pacific, the Qing dynasty's markets favor hard currency. Taxes calculated in silver create a gentle magnet that draws bullion eastward. Manila becomes a hinge in this movement, a harbor where American silver meets Asian demand. Galleons take on the slow swell of the long crossing, holds filled with bars and coins that will become silk, tea, and porcelain on the reverse route. The Atlantic and Pacific are not separate stories. They are two breaths in the same chest, inhaling bullion from the New World and exhaling goods that shape European and colonial rooms. Unknown to many in Philadelphia counting houses, their coin bowls and tills respond to decisions made an ocean away. When silver flows toward Canton, specie thins in Atlantic ports. When a convoy reaches Cadiz, fresh coin drifts outward to creditors and merchants in turn. Colonial bills of exchange, written in careful hands, bridge the gaps, promising payment when ships arrive. A note folded with precision sits in a clerk's drawer like a seed waiting for rain. If the rain is late, prices inch upward, patience lengthens, and substitutions begin. Fewer imports, more local cloth, a different spice that costs a little less. Let us consider the human moment of coin on a scale. In a dim shop, a shopkeeper sets a Spanish dollar on the pan, then adds small weights until the beam settles level. The coin's ridged edge guards against shaving. The soft scrape of metal on metal is a reassurance learned over years. A buyer watches, nods, and the two trade in silence more than in speech. Trust rests in the shared ritual. When a clipped coin appears, the balance hesitates, and so do the eyes. The coin is refused gently, not as an insult, but as a protection of the bond between them. In the quiet unfolding of 1776, this flow of silver touches independence through the narrow channel of debt and duty. Colonial treasuries need reliable payment to provision troops, settle accounts, and keep markets from seizing. Without enough coin, paper promises must carry more weight. Those promises seek anchors in expected taxes and future shipments, and their acceptance depends on memory. Has this issuer kept faith before? The hunger for monetary autonomy grows not from theory, but from the daily ache of delay when a cargo is late and a bill comes due. To truly understand the reach of silver, watch it change names as it moves. In Spain, it is a pillar dollar. In the colonies, it is a piece of 8. In China, it is weighed as sicey or measured against local taels. The form shifts, the standards differ, but the sensation remains. Weight that settles a deal. This consistency allows distant events to pulse through local prices. A monsoon delays a galleon, a mint slows, a warship patrols a strait, and somewhere in Boston, a grocer raises the price of tea by a little, not in anger, but in arithmetic. While that was happening in Manila, a merchant in New York writes to a partner in London, the language restrained and tidy. The letter asks for longer credit and explains that coin is scarce, that paper is sound for now, that shipments are expected by autumn. The reply will take months, traveling by pouch and packet, wrapped in waxed paper to keep out the damp. In the space between the asking and the answer, a city learns to glide. Smaller coins combined, barter revived briefly, favors recorded in ledgers with a pencil mark that will be inked when coin returns. This was the moment everything changed in practice, though it looked like nothing more than careful patience. Colonial dependence on global bullion made the case for domestic control of minting and policy. It did not require a declaration to notice that decisions about coin made far away could choke a town's market. Independence, as it settled, included the quiet wish to measure, stamp, and circulate value without waiting for another shore to approve. In the aftermath, silver continued to move as before, indifferent to speeches. But people were different. They had learned where the veins of trust ran and where they thinned. They had learned to weigh a coin and a promise with equal care. And as we drift toward the creak of timbers and the smell of salt-cured leather, the ocean's slow pulse carries not only goods and coins, but also the timing that lets messages and decisions arrive just late enough to make local judgment necessary. Now we step onto damp planks before dawn, where tar breathes a dark perfume and the decks hold last night's mist. The Atlantic speaks in slow syllables, the roll of a swell, the soft thud of a coil of rope, the faint rasp of salt on leather that has been cured to outlast a season. Here, decisions move at the speed of wind and current, and governance bends to a timetable that the sea keeps without apology. Convoys form like patient flocks. Captains compare notes at anchor, charts unrolled on a rough table that leans with the tide. A sloop that once darted ahead must now wait for a lumbering transport, because safety lives in numbers. As the fleet sets out, the order is practical and quiet. Signals agreed upon, lantern codes rehearsed, and a plan for fog that says simply, hold course and listen. Privateers prowl the edges like shadows, testing the flock for gaps. The creak of timber is constant, a metronome that measures distance more reliably than any bell. It is important to remember that every policy sent across this water shifts in transit. A directive written in a London office takes weeks to arrive at a colonial port already changed by rumours of its coming. By the time a harbour pilot hands a packet of sealed orders to a customs collector, local merchants have adjusted to a half-true version gleaned from a returning mate. The delay is not merely an inconvenience. It is the gap where local judgment enters, where assemblies consider not just what the order says, but when it arrived and what has already been done. On deck, navigation is a ritual of patience. A sextant lifts, the arc steady as the horizon breathes. Noon sights are waited upon like appointments with a trusted friend. A navigator hums under his breath, numbers placed with care in a log that will be read ashore by clerks who have never seen a green sea. Meanwhile, below, letters lie wrapped in oiled cloth, resting in a captain's chest. Some carry news of contracts, others the simple kindness of a household inventory relayed to a son. 1 cow freshened, 2 barrels of apples put up, a fence mended. While that was happening at sea, the shore prepared to receive whatever the weather allowed. Port officials post lists of arrivals and expected cargoes, the handwriting careful even when the knowledge is approximate. Warehouses clear space in hope, and then fill with the goods that arrive first, not always the ones expected. A merchant who ordered linen must make do with sailcloth. A grocer who promised sugar sells molasses instead. The substitutions are not dramatic. They are adjustments that keep kitchens fed and shops open, an unspoken pact between patience and necessity. Unknown to them, across town, a post rider tightens girths and checks the leather satchel that will carry inland the news the ships deliver. The road is a chain of inns and milestones, each stop calibrated by the weight of the mail and the condition of the horse. Weather slows everything equally. A flooded ford extends a rumour by 2 days and postpones a regulation by 3. Assemblies that wait for confirmation of a distant vote discover they must choose whether to act on what is likely, not on what is sure. This was the moment everything changed in practice, as the ocean taught a form of federalism before any constitution wrote it down. Distance demanded delegation, slowness required discretion. A town that could not wait for permission repaired its wharf anyway. A committee set a quarantine before a harbour master could find the seal on a crumpled order. The Atlantic's pulse trained people to trust those closest to the problem, because the next tide would not pause while a letter was drafted. Let us consider the human textures that fix these lessons in memory. Tar under fingernails that will not wash out until spring. Salt-cured leather that creaks when folded, a sound like a door opening to a familiar room. Damp charts that must be dried near a stove before they are legible again. Faint pencil lines darkened with a timid stroke so as not to warp the paper. Gulls at dawn, circling the mouth of a river that leads to town, their calls mixing with the steady knock of a caulker's mallet. Meanwhile, across the ocean, insurers tot up risk with a quill that wobbles as a carriage rattles over cobblestones. Better charts, steadier chronometers, and known convoy routes lower premiums by increments that matter in a ledger. Those tiny savings ripple through to prices on wharves far away, where a cask is sold for a penny less and a household budget breathes a little easier. The improvement is quiet and cumulative, a tide of precision lifting many small boats. In the aftermath of a delayed fleet, policies look different. Assemblies that once waited now anticipate. They draft provisions with the ocean's lag in mind, set expiration dates that match sailing seasons, and word instructions so that a sheriff on a rain-soaked road knows when to interpret rather than to enforce to the letter. Governance learns to ride the swell. Orders are still written, seals still pressed, but the tone softens, the clauses widen, and the expectation shifts from rigid compliance to faithful execution. And so the Atlantic carries more than cargo. It carries a habit of time. News arrives late enough that people must decide early. That rhythm settles into markets and councils alike, until the creak of timber and the smell of salt-cured leather are not just maritime details, but the background against which independence learns to move, slow, steady, and confident within the long, patient intervals that the sea requires. While the ocean measured time in long breaths, towns learned a quieter lesson ashore. When answers arrive late, responsibility arrives early. We find ourselves in meeting rooms where benches are worn and windows rattle softly in the wind. The Crown's officers have gone, or they linger without clarity. The room does not wait. A chair is filled, a clerk opens a book, and a committee of safety reads the first item on its list in a voice meant for calm. It is important to remember that the stakes now touch bread, barrels, and borders. If authority dissolves, debt floats without an anchor. If titles fail, contracts waver. If stores are not guarded, hunger rises. The pivot from asset to actor begins as a set of errands. Militia stores are counted. A powder magazine is moved inland by ox cart at dawn. A bridge is inspected, its planks measured, its rails tightened, because troop movements will use it whether anyone approves or not. This is sovereignty in work clothes. Moving slowly forward in time, provisional congresses gather, the names of their members familiar from market stalls and pews. They draft resolves that do not sound like manifestos. They sound like schedules. How many men to muster, which districts to supply, what rate to offer for flour delivered to a depot, how to issue receipts that will hold their value long enough to matter. Responsibility for defense settles onto ledgers and lists. Contracts are signed in new names that still feel strange under the hand, as if the pen hesitates at the change in weight. Meanwhile, across the countryside, sheriffs and constables adjust the oaths they administer. A phrase is crossed out, another inserted, and the same steady palm raises as before. Titles shift by degrees. A king's attorney becomes a commonwealth's. A royal seal is scraped from a door and replaced with a hastily carved emblem that will be refined later. Continuity is preserved on purpose. Court days proceed, not because someone said they must, but because the town needs wills proved, deeds recorded, and disputes settled lest property go soft around the edges. What nobody knew at the time was how much credit would hinge on tone. Merchants and farmers are willing to extend supplies to committees if the receipts read as if someone will be here in 6 months. A voucher with a careful hand and a clear countermark feels different from a hurried note. The expectation of repayment is a quiet form of allegiance. When barrels roll into a warehouse under guard, when a clerk tallies weights and measures with the same patience as last year, confidence grows that a new actor is taking shape without raising its voice. Let us consider a small morning in a town hall. A requisition for blankets is read. The room weighs the request against the ledger. A motion passes to buy from 3 local weavers at a set price, payable in notes, redeemable in taxes. A rider is dispatched with copies, the paper folded with a practiced crease. Outside, a cart waits, wheels chalked on a grade. The pivot is not a speech, it is the cart moving. This was the moment everything changed in habit. Debt, once a metropolitan concern, becomes a neighborhood promise. War expenses are expected, but the approach is restrained. Assess modestly, pay promptly when possible, keep records exact. A treasurer explains to a baker that his notes will count against next year's levy, and the baker nods because the treasurer has said the same about road repairs and school stipends for years. Legitimacy arrives in the voice that repeats familiar procedures while naming unfamiliar authorities. Meanwhile, across the ocean, agents write letters in careful French and cautious Dutch, couching requests for loans in the language of mutual advantage and steady trade. They do not bluff with grand claims. They point to committees at work, to taxes levied peaceably, to courts in session, to ships provisioned and accounts kept. This is diplomacy made of spreadsheets and receipts, not trumpets. Credit abroad begins where trust at home is visible on paper. Human moments fix these shifts. A signet once used to press wax for royal proclamations is reworked, the old device filed away, a new emblem engraved by a local artisan who wipes metal dust from his hands and looks for balance in the design. A clerk updates his title at the top of a form and pauses, then continues. A door that bore the king's arms now bears a simple board painted with the word council. People walk through it with the same errands as yesterday. In the aftermath, procurement becomes policy. Contracts for flour specify barrel sizes, binding quality, delivery windows tied to river levels. Muskets are inspected to a standard set by a committee that includes a blacksmith who has never left his county but knows what will fail under strain. The state is being built as a series of competent decisions. The transition from asset to actor is enacted in the maintenance of roads, the guarding of storehouses, the punctual closing of accounts. To truly understand the pivot, watch signatures change. Names are written with an added word: state, commonwealth, council, and then the line is held. Seals reappear with new symbols, and those symbols begin to gather habits around them. Where they are stored, who holds them, when they may be used. Authority resolves into custody of small objects and faithful execution of routine tasks. The war continues beyond these walls, but inside them, independence settles into duties performed at the hour they have always been performed. In quiet summary, the colonies step from being counted as holdings to counting themselves. They inherit debt, defense, and diplomacy, and approach each with the same calm applied to parish rates and market weights. It is important to remember that sovereignty often feels like paperwork done well. The pivot is a rotation on well-oiled hinges, a door that swings, not with a crash, but with a measured, confident ease. While committees count barrels and sign receipts, another current carries steadiness into the marrow of daily life. We find ourselves outside a courthouse with steps worn smooth by years of careful feet. The royal arms are gone from the lintel, the shadow of their shape still faint on the stone. A new board hangs where they once were, plain and serviceable. The bell rings at the familiar hour. People gather because the calendar says they should. It is important to remember what a court day means to a town. It is the clearinghouse of promises. Deeds are acknowledged, wills approved, bonds are recorded, and marriage is announced with a quiet joy that sits gently beside disputes. When royal officers depart or hesitate, the docket does not pause. A clerk opens a heavy book and writes the date with the same hand he used last month. He scratches out one title, writes another, and keeps the columns aligned. The continuity is deliberate, as steady as breath. To truly understand this shift, we must first consider the form of a writ. The parchment is cut to a known size, the text arranged in a pattern that eyes recognize faster than tongues can read. Where the king's name once began the formula, a state now stands. The language of command remains measured, the return day set, the seal space left ready. A justice hears a petition to reissue writs under new authority. The arguments are brief. The law, they say, is the path. The seal is only the lantern that shows it. The path does not move.
Meanwhile, across town, a registry of deeds receives a couple who have waited for this day. A boundary stone's description is rehearsed. Oak, stream, bend, distance by chain. The recorder nods, asks for witnesses, and enters the names in order. The ink dries, the paper folded and filed under a letter that still means the same property regardless of the emblem at the top. Ownership does not float in politics. It settles where neighbors agree and courts acknowledge. What nobody knew at the time was how calming these routines would be. Probate inventories proceed room by room, not as a tally of wealth, but as a map of memory that blesses continuity. A bedstead, 3 chairs, a kettle, a chest of linens, a cracked mirror noted without embarrassment. Heirs accept shares with relief that the list exists at all. A judge signs with care, the flourish smaller than before, the authority no less firm. The household can remain itself. While that was happening in one province, another quietly revises its charter. Provisions that once bound it to an imperial governor are recast to fit a council chosen locally. Courts of Oyer and Termina become simply sessions held by men the town knows. The names change softly. The procedures remain. Appeals are permitted on the same grounds. Fees are posted on the same board, in the same hand, adjusted only where the coin has shifted. People glance, count their coins, and nod. Let us consider the oath, that small ceremony where words bind more strongly than walls. A magistrate stands with a book whose leather has been repaired at the corners. He invites a constable to speak the pledge. A phrase is removed, another placed, but the eyes meet in the same plain trust as last year. The oath ends with the same quiet, "So help me," and hands lower with the same calm. Authority returns to the tasks that justify it, serving writs, marking fines, keeping the peace. Unknown to them, across the hall, a small argument about stamps resolves itself with practical grace. The royal stamp is gone. A new embossing tool has not arrived. The clerk notes in the margin that the fee is paid, the impression to be added when the press is ready. The parties agree. A ribbon holds the papers, red as always,
cut from a spool bought months ago under the old system. Continuity rests in these accommodations, where everyone decides that the spirit of the rule is serviceable without its old decoration. This was the moment everything changed in expectation. People discovered that justice could proceed on schedule without a king's name above it. The thing that mattered was the waiting room, the docket, the clerk's clear voice, the judge's patience, the juror's steady presence. Verdicts came, not with flourish, but with reasons that citizens could carry home and discuss in peace. Law became a neighborly habit instead of a distant authority. Meanwhile, across the repositories that keep memory safe, charters, minutes, and proclamations were copied and preserved with careful headings. A town's book gains a new preface explaining the transition in a paragraph that reads like a blessing. Offices remain, duties continue, forms persist with necessary alterations. The language is restrained and plain, the effect profound. In years to come, those pages will be the proof that the year did not break. It bent and held. In the aftermath, small adjustments accumulate into stability. Court terms are posted with an eye to harvest and roads. Witness fees are paid in notes that the treasurer redeems against taxes, closing a circle that ties law to livelihood. Marriage bans are read as before, a pause placed between the names, the congregation murmuring approval in the familiar tone of shared life. A sheriff returns a writ served, his report neat, his boots dusty, the journey written in the margin as a distance and a day. In quiet summary, law without the king is law with the community's full attention. Charters are not torn, they are amended as one mends offence, post by post, rail by rail, until the line is true again. Courts breathe, clerks write, seals reappear with new symbols, and the great facts of daily security, property honoured, contracts enforced, promises kept, continue to arrive on time. Meanwhile, the ocean broadens into a map as calm as glass, and inland another rhythm begins to steady itself. We find ourselves near Birmingham, where a manufactory hums with a low, even sound that feels like breathing. Coal smoke lifts without haste. Iron waits in stacked bars. In workshops lit by high windows, careful hands bring brass, iron, and oak into a smooth conversation. A beam rises, a piston descends, and the cycle repeats with a patience that does not tire. It is important to remember what this means at ground level. Power unhooks from waterfalls and muscle. Where a river once set the pace of a mill, a fire now sets it, and fire can be tended through the night. Bolton and Watt refine an engine so that steam does not hiss away into waste but returns to work again, condensed and recollected, conserved like coin in a well-kept purse. The game is not a shout, it is a margin. Less coal for the same lift, more hours from the same wheel, prices edging toward a line that a ledger can love. Let us consider the day's measured tasks. A fitter stones a valve face until light disappears at the join. A turner listens to the song of a lathe and knows when the cut is true. The soundscape is quiet industry, files rasping, a kettle clicking on iron, boots whispering on grit. Tea cools beside a drawing, steam faint and companionable.
A foreman moves a finger along a plan and nods to a boy holding a spanner that
still feels large in his hand. Work proceeds by inches, and those inches accumulate into reliability.
Moving slowly forward in time, an engine leaves Soho and arrives at a mine where water stands heavy in the dark. The beam begins its patient bow and the pit dries by degrees. A cart rolls sooner. A shipment is filled earlier. Downstream, a foundry receives ore without a gap, pours iron to a schedule that smooths prices. Across the sea, merchants feel it without names. Goods that used to run late arrive within the week they were promised. The effect is a kind of lullaby for trade, a promise that the world will miss fewer beats. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, expectations adjust in counting houses and warehouses. If British engines make British output steadier, orders placed from colonial ports become less of a guess. A clothier's assortment lands closer to what was asked. A barrel of hardware has fewer defects. A letter from a partner says simply, "Allow for a shorter delay this year, the works are improved." No trumpet announces this improvement.
It enters life as a variance reduced, a contingency crossed out, a ship loaded with less anxiety at the last minute.
To truly understand the tie to independence, follow the arithmetic. A steadier supply lowers cost by slivers. Those slivers make it easier to price goods without a cushion for failure. Shopkeepers in a colonial square feel brave enough to offer fixed terms through the season. When a new government asks for provisions at a posted rate, suppliers can say yes because their own upstream prices are less temperamental. The state's requests sound reasonable when the mill's heartbeat is regular. Human textures hold the story still. Soot gathers on cuffs where fabric rubs a beam support each morning. A mechanic warms a chilled cylinder with a wool cloth because metal shrinks in night air, and a cold start strains a joint. A boy wipes condensed water from a pipe and learns that steam is a useful ghost. Seen on the breath, felt on the skin, contained by a seal that must never be hurried. At day's end, the same boy watches his master note a small improvement in a ledger, half an inch shaved from a stroke to reduce shock on a bearing, and sees that progress is a line of such entries, not a leap. What nobody knew at the time was how much this rhythm would soften risk across an empire. Insurers prefer machines that behave. Investors prefer furnaces that hold temperature. Artisans prefer gauges that agree. The language of trust shifts toward tolerance and error bands, toward maintenance schedules and inspection marks. This is a politics of the wristwatch long before watches are common. When things run on time, people argue less about whose fault lateness might be. While that was happening in the Midlands, speculation grew quietly in colonial minds. If engines can be licensed, parts copied, skills trained, then one day power will sit in American workshops as steadily as in English ones. Independence begins to include an imagined sound. The measured beat of pistons under a roof that bears a local emblem. Foundries planned on surveyors' maps. Timber set aside for beams. Apprentices taught to file flat, to drill true, to scrape until a surface holds oil like a second skin. A future economy is pictured not as clamour, but as dependable motion. In the aftermath of these early machines, prices record the whisper. A candle costs a fraction less because wicks are spun in greater volume on time. A kettle is more uniform because molds are poured on a sequence that reduces flaws. A pump for a dock arrives before a spring flood
and saves a key from damage that would have taken a season to mend. Each instance is small. Together, they are the comfort that allows councils to plan with less fear.
In quiet summary, the industrial whisper is a metronome for policy and household alike. Bolton and Watt do not change the sky. They change the steadiness of the ground underfoot. Engines tick in measured cycles, and with each stroke, price, promise, and plan become a little more reliable. The beat carries across water, through ledgers, into kitchens, and onto wharves, teaching a young polity to value schedules, maintenance, and modest improvements, the ordinary virtues that let independence hold its shape.
Meanwhile, across a width of water that seems to have no end, a ship moves through a calm so wide that speech feels unnecessary. We find ourselves on a quarterdeck where the horizon draws a clean line, and the sky lowers itself gently into the sea. The air is salt and sunlight. The ink in the logbook dries before the next entry begins. Precision is the purpose here, and patience is the method. It is important to remember that safer routes are stitched from quiet observations. A chronometer rests in a padded box, its heartbeat measured against noon, its springs protected from shock with the care one reserves for a vow. A sextant lifts. A bright point is caught. Angles are read. Numbers enter a neat column with little flourish. Latitude settles first, then longitude approaches like a polite guest at the door. Each new fix is a promise to the men who sleep below, where hammocks sway like slow pendulums in a human clock. To truly understand this blue silence, watch the ritual before the sun stands highest. The deck is scrubbed. Instruments are shaded and uncovered in order. A midshipman waits with the slate. The captain, steady, composed, rests a hand on the rail until the moment arrives. The ship rises and falls as if breathing, and the horizon remains a faithful line. Noon comes. A figure is set, and the ocean becomes slightly less vast. While that was happening at sea, cartographers ashore rearranged coastlines with polite confidence. New inlets appear. Shoals shift to their proper places. The blankness at the edge of old maps receives a cautious outline, not as boast, but as a measured offering. Insurance tables respond with small acts of mercy. A premium eased for a route now charted by soundings, a surcharge trimmed for a passage whose rocks have names. Every reduction feels like a hand resting gently on a merchant's shoulder. Unknown to many who read the maps in counting rooms, these corrections have the texture of hours at a rail. A lead line swings, drops, rises, and the call travels aft, by the mark. Entries refer to watercolor, to birds, to the smell of shore weeds caught on the wind. The science is not remote, it is embodied.
Eyes narrowed, fingers weathered, backs bent to keep the slate dry. Confidence accrues like dew, a film so thin it can be missed, and yet it makes everything hold together.
Let us consider the human notes that float upon this discipline. The measured scrape of a sextant's arc sets a rhythm for the morning. Ink scratches in a log that must remain legible through damp and heat. A lookout's voice drops when dolphins pace the bow, a sign of the current's favor.
Noon sights are followed by a simple meal, salted meat, ship's biscuit, water rationed with care, taken with a quiet pride that the day's work has slightly reduced the unknown. Meanwhile, across the networks of trade that depend upon such patience, timetables become plausible promises. A tea shipment leaves a named anchorage on a day that can be written in a contract. A letter sent ahead to a port names the week of arrival as more than a hope. Those who insure cargo, who hire teams to unload, who arrange carriage inland, all breathe a little easier and arrange fewer contingencies. A harbour town begins to expect the bell to ring when a mast is sighted at the river bend. What nobody knew at the time was how clearly this temperament would suit a year shaping governance through steadiness rather than spectacle. The tone of blue water science, observe, verify, note, proceed, bleeds ashore. Surveyors work with chains that click against stones. Almanac makers correct sunrise by a minute and print the improvement without ceremony. Assemblies appreciate the value of a margin of error honestly confessed. A culture learns to trust numbers that are humble and plans that are exact without boasting. While that was happening beyond sight of land, the ocean's silence entered sermons and editorials. Ministers praised the order written into creation, the stars serving as instruments for those who travelled by consent of nature's clock. Printers relayed accounts of coasts drawn with kindness to those who would follow. The effect on daily life is gentle. A shopkeeper hears that a ship has cleared a cape safely mapped and decides to extend credit 1 week more. A family, awaiting a letter, listens for the rider on the day the route suggests and sets an extra bowl upon the table. In the aftermath of newly traced coasts, caution becomes efficiency. Pilots teach apprentices the angles that matter. Ship's masters write standing orders that handle fog and squalls with routines tested by men who measured rather than guessed. The cost of error falls not through miracle, but through attention. This is governance by another name, choosing to be guided by what has been carefully seen. In quiet summary, Cook's blue silence is not an empty space. It is a mind at work within a vast calm. Chronometers tick, sextants arc, logs accept neat figures, and the ocean yields a route that others can follow. The game comes softly, insurance eased, schedules believed, letters likely to arrive. And in that softness, a young polity learns what it will need most. Patience joined to precision, observation wed to duty, and confidence earned, line by measured line. Back on shore, thought turns into sermon, editorial, and oath, moving with the easy steadiness of a hand across a page. We find ourselves in rooms where chairs are pulled close and windows are cracked for air, where words are not shouted, but read, weighed, and then set gently into the habits of a household. It is important to remember that legitimacy grows where people gather to agree about small things, and there is no place smaller and sturdier than a parlour table. Let us consider the sound of a pamphlet in a quiet room. Paper opens with a soft sigh. A line is traced with a fingertip. A sentence is repeated for a neighbour who leans closer, the candle flame bending as if listening. The printer's type carries arguments in short, plain bursts, not to dazzle, but to lodge. A notion about taxation lands beside a schedule for market day, and the two find they do not compete. They coordinate. A listener nods, sets a saucer down, and says that a levy tied to consent feels like a fee for a service, not a tribute to a stranger. Meanwhile, across a meeting house, a minister's voice settles over pews like a shawl. The text is steady, the cadence patient. He speaks of covenants, of promises made and kept, of duties accepted because they are shared. The sermon does not name distant officers, it names neighbors. The stakes are close. How to care for the poor, how to repair a fence, how to appoint a committee to inspect weights and measures.
The application is simple. A people who keep these near obligations are fit to keep the larger ones that come with self-rule.
To truly understand the reach of these moments, we must first consider the path from printing press to pantry. Sheets dry on a line, their ink settling into fibers that will stand years of handling. Bundles travel by cart, then by rider, then by hand from shop to stoop. A broadside is pasted on a door and read aloud to those who cannot spare the time to stop. In kitchens, lines are paraphrased between tasks.
A mother repeats a phrase while kneading dough. A child tries the new word allegiance and finds that it feels like a promise made to friends.
While that was happening in a city square, a country crossroads hosted its own exchange. The post arrives, and with it, newspapers folded to survive the road. Reports of debates and resolves are not consumed like spectacle. They are sifted like flour. A paragraph on a committee's decision becomes a model for a town's next meeting. The tone is contagious, calm, precise, and mindful of consequences. Editors who learn to set type in columns now find they set example as well, marking facts cleanly, reserving heat for places where harm has been done and must be accounted for with care. Unknown to them, across the continent of correspondence, letters are braided into these public texts. A shopkeeper writes to a cousin about a reading at the tavern, about the room's stillness when a clause on rights was spoken, about the vote to affirm an oath that did not ask for a king's name. The cousin copies a paragraph into a commonplace book. Months later, the same words surface in a town 2 counties away, now part of a toast, now part of the notes for a school exercise. Ideas become itinerant guests, travelling by courtesy. Let us consider the oath as it lives at domestic scale. Town halls gather citizens who raise their hands as they have for years, boards posted with names checked off in ink. The oath itself is brief. It swaps a single phrase and keeps the rest. The response is quiet. The effect is profound. Neighbors recognize each other under a new description and find that the introduction holds. Contracts signed the next day
use the updated title without strain. The adjustment becomes ordinary by being repeated where people already trust the setting.
Meanwhile, across the tables of the Library of Congress and in the careful frames of local archives, sermons, pamphlets, and broadsides accumulate, each one a steady bead in a larger string. Printers' ornaments repeat. Signatures match. The design of a title line, the flourish around a border, the spacing of a date, these are the small comforts of continuity. Researchers will later point to them as evidence.
For now, they are simply familiar, and familiarity lowers the heart rate of a reader who might otherwise bristle at change.
What nobody knew at the time was how strongly these domestic rituals would train a republic's reflexes. The habit of reading aloud teaches patience for the whole argument. The practice of moderated debate in a parlor teaches how to yield a point gracefully. The rhythm of weekly sermons teaches how to organize thought into beginnings, middles, and ends. When assemblies convene, they do so with muscles already conditioned for deliberation. Human textures hold this together. Quills scratch on foolscap at a side table while stew simmers. A child copies a motto into a copybook, the letters uneven but earnest. Warm bread is sliced for guests, and the talk continues through the meal without edge. A nod of assent travels around a circle and settles matters more firmly than a gavel could. The legitimacy of new forms of address, state, council, assembly, arrives because people have been saying them together in rooms where they have long agreed about repairs and harvests. In the aftermath, the social fabric tightens rather than frays. Neighbors who once spoke only of weather now speak of procedure with the same calm interest. Parish committees and town boards adopt the phrases they have learned from printed sheets, not to sound grand, but to be clear. The next time a notice is posted, it draws quick, steady readers who know where to sign and when to gather. Ideas have come home, and home has made them durable. We find ourselves now at first light, when the city is hushed and the streets hold last night's cool. A merchant wakes before the bell, moves through a room ordered by lists, and lights a candle with a steady hand. It is important to remember that stability begins here, where habit meets intention. The morning ledger opens to a page ruled yesterday, numbers waiting for their companions. Inventory first, always. Pins, needles, tea, soap, sugar, tallies checked against a small slate kept in a coat pocket the day before. The door is unbarred with a careful lift. Air enters with the faint salt of the river and the spice of cargo that spent weeks at sea. Shelves are straightened. Bolts of cloth are aligned for the eye to measure a yard without fuss. A jar of cinnamon is moved to the front because 3 households asked yesterday. A price is penciled on a scrap, then inked when the mind agrees that the number will hold. In this, independence takes its quiet form, not in a flag, but in a figure that satisfies both sides of a counter. Let us consider the first customers, those who prefer the early hour. A cooper's wife asks for candles, and the merchant offers a choice between tallow and a finer wax, quoting both in a voice that does not hurry. Payment is a note from her husband, redeemable in credit against barrels to be delivered to the docks. The merchant folds the note with care, adds a neat mark in the ledger, and ties the candles with twine that has measured out 100 such bundles. Names and prices settle into columns that already know how to hold them. Meanwhile, across the riverfront, a clerk from a commissary stops by with a list headed by a new authority. It reads the same as last month, only the title has changed. Flour, salt, coarse cloth for sacks, all at rates fixed by a committee that met in the same hall where auctions used to be called. The merchant and the clerk weigh the numbers against memory. It is reasonable, they agree. Receipts will be paid in notes
Set against taxes due. The ledger accepts the transaction as if it recognizes the handwriting, which, in a way, it does. The same hands, now writing different names.
After mid-morning, The merchant walks to the port. Counting houses breathe a mild bustle. Letters are taken in, unfolded, and laid upon a table that has seen many seasons. From a partner comes word of goods delayed by weather, of sugar replaced by molasses, of sailcloth arriving instead of fine linen. A small sigh, a small recalibration. Prices will be adjusted, not as punishment, but as the arithmetic of distance. A list of expected cargoes is copied in a neat hand and pinned above the desk with a new heading: Arrivals to be confirmed. The habit of patience serves better than any proclamation. To truly understand the day, watch how courtesy runs through it like a narrow river. In the market, a farmer offers eggs with the care of a man who knows both the work and the worth. The merchant does not haggle to win. He balances to steady. A fair price posted, a weight set true, a measure poured level. The trust is mutual, and it keeps the room quiet. Voices rise only to be heard. They do not rise to contend. It is important to remember that such peace is earned by the accuracy of scales and the memory of promises kept. Back at the shop, a boy apprentices at the side table, copying figures into a second book that will be checked at dusk. He learns that the day is a chain, each link a small completion. A woman brings linen to be measured. The yardstick is placed slow and square, the cut clean, the edge pressed with a palm so the fold will keep. A coin clinks, milled edge tested with a thumb, then set aside to be weighed at day's end, because even familiar coins deserve a moment on the balance. Paper notes rest in a drawer, folded by denomination and date, a soft rustle that sounds like tomorrow. While that was happening, a messenger comes with a broadside. By order of the council, market inspections will continue on the same days, with the same fines, under new seals to be affixed when ready. The merchant nods and posts it by the door. Customers read it on their way in, as they once read notices under the king's arms. The practice survives the emblem. A child spells out the capital letters beneath a parent's patient finger. The room accepts the adjustment as it accepts a shift in weather. In the afternoon, correspondence is answered in a measured style. Partners are informed of arrivals, substitutions, and the small variances that matter in kitchens and workshops. Terms are offered modestly. Credit is extended to those who always close accounts before harvest, noted with a discreet mark. A reminder is drafted to a debtor whose circumstances are known, the tone gentle because hardship is not a stranger this year. The merchant files copies under a new label that sits behind an old one. Both are kept because memory is wealth. As the light lowers, the day is reconciled. The apprentice reads back the entries. Mistakes are rare and corrected without fuss. A coin scale comes out. The weights kiss the pan and settle. Paper notes are counted twice, smoothed and stacked with a ribbon. The door is barred again, the counter wiped, the window latched. A final line is drawn beneath the day, a crisp boundary that turns labor into record. In the quiet, the merchant hears a bell mark the hour without urgency. In quiet summary, a household remains steady because the city teaches it how. Lists kept, prices fair, letters answered, seals observed, oaths respected. Independence lives in these motions.
Municipal orders followed, committees trusted, credit extended with care. We find ourselves now at the end of a day that might have been any day, and yet it has carried a new name across its surface without a ripple.
We find ourselves now where the river moves with an old patience, its banks stitched with willows and small fields that repeat like a hymn. Dawn lifts in a pale band. A farmer wakes to the bell, not to news, and steps onto packed earth that knows his tread. It is important to remember that rents, tithes and weather set a cadence here, and that cadence has few surprises. The door opens to air that smells of damp stone and straw. A bread crust is dipped in yesterday's broth. A list forms in the mind without paper. Mend the hedge on the north boundary, check the sluice at the ditch, turn the soil in the kitchen plot. Tools lean in their places like quiet friends. Hoe, fork, billhook, each worn to a grip that fits one hand only. Let us consider the first hour. 2 cows are led from the byre, their breath white in the cool. A pail fills in a steady rhythm that needs no counting. Chickens scatter at the soft toss of grain. The yard is swept with a short broom, not as ceremony, but as habit that keeps mice away.
The farmer looks at the sky longer than a traveller would, reading the light for rain, reading the wind for change, reading the season as if it were a ledger he has kept since boyhood.
Meanwhile, across a narrow lane, a neighbour hefts a sack for market. A cart will roll to the town square where stalls stand under a timbered hall. The prices there answer to forces felt only faintly. Taxes levied in places he will never see, silver drifting along routes he does not travel, ships beating slow paths over oceans he has only heard described. What arrives to him are numbers spoken by the miller and the fabric merchant, small adjustments that thicken or thin a winter's comfort. To truly understand the day, watch the repairs. A hinge squeaks, a pin is whittled to silence it, a roof tile is lifted, cleaned, and set back with a dab of lime. Hands mend more than objects, they mend the year. Fences define duty. The hedge holds sheep on one side and obligation on the other. The farmer trims it to the line agreed in a contract that names an owner and a tenant and leaves the land itself unchanged in the eyes of both. While that was happening in the fields, church bells mark the hour with a tone that carries even through rows of vines. The parish priest will later read a ban or announce a levy, and the words will fold themselves into life like flour into water, invisible and binding. A tithe is measured in grain, not in coin, and the granary keeps its own books, bins filled, bins tapped, a chalk mark on a board that has been wiped and marked again for years. Unknown to them, beyond a low horizon, empires converse. Silver thins or thickens in ports that touch their fabric and salt by delay, not by decree. Engines in England breathe a steadier rhythm and soften prices by a coin's width. A ship charts a truer course and arrives with goods 1 week sooner. The farmer feels all of it as a market day that is slightly kinder than last year, or as a rent collected at the same rate but paid with less effort because the harvest held. Let us consider the noon meal. It is not abundant, but it is orderly. Bread, cheese, onions, perhaps a slice of cured meat, saved for a day that called for strength. A jug of water, cool from the well, stands in the shade. Conversation is simple. Weather, neighbours,
the wheel at the mill that stuck and was freed. The tone is calm. It is important to remember that continuity lives here in the way knives are placed, in the way a child learns to pass a bowl with both hands. In the afternoon, vines claim attention. Shoots are tied with twistings of willow. Weak growth is pinched. The work is precise and unhurried, a craft learned by watching, corrected by a quiet word from one who has watched longer. The sun leans. Shadows lengthen beside the furrows that will accept seed when the moon is right. A ledger exists in the mind. What was done, what remains, what must be ready when the agent of the estate arrives to note the state of ditches and the width of paths. Meanwhile, across the square miles that feed this town, wheels turn at the mill. Grain lifts in a scoop, falls in a soft thunder, and becomes flour that settles like a breath on the miller's sleeves. A toll is taken, not argued, because the stones have spun to feed this valley longer than memory recites. The farmer's sack returns lighter and more useful. A portion will be set aside for dues. A portion will be baked into loaves. A portion will be saved against a week when rain keeps the oven cold. What nobody knew at the time was how well this pattern would frame a quiet comparison. Across an ocean, a merchant's day turns by letters and ledgers. Here, a farmer's day turns by bells and seasons. Both maintain order by tending what is near. Authority is a familiar arrangement of papers and gates in town, and of paths and fences here. Change arrives as a phrase added to a notice at the church door, as a measure enforced by a man whose father enforced it, and so anxiety finds little purchase. As dusk settles, tools are cleaned and hung. Animals are fed. The door is barred with a beam polished by many evenings. A candle is lit, and hands rest on the table's edge. A prayer is said, as it was yesterday. The tally of the day's work is spoken in a few words, and answered with a few more. Outside, the river moves without haste. In quiet summary, this rural rhythm in the Loire holds its line as distant histories shift. Rents are met, tithes delivered, hedges trimmed, markets visited, and weather watched. The cadence is steady and old, and in that steadiness, it offers a mirror to the colonial novelty across the sea. Different names, different councils, the same human need for time kept, promises honored, and work done when the bell says it is time. While coins thinned and scales hesitated, a different sound entered rooms where accounts were kept. The soft rustle of paper notes counted in careful hands. We find ourselves beside a table where a stack of fresh emissions rests under a small weight, corners aligned, ink still faintly fragrant. It is important to remember that faith in paper is faith in a future, and futures are built from promises that can be redeemed. Let us consider the moment of issue. A resolution is read in a chamber warm with bodies and wax. Amount, denominations, security of plate, and the taxes that will one day draw these notes home, all set out in deliberate lines. Signers bend over a form, pens refreshed, names repeated until wrists ache. A countermark is pressed. The notes are not grand, they are tidy. They carry an emblem and a phrase that asks to be believed. Outside, a clerk ties packets with twine and records their destinations in a ledger that will be balanced month by month. Meanwhile, across a marketplace, a shopkeeper receives a note with both curiosity and caution. He turns it to the light. He traces the border with a thumb. He recognizes a signature and relaxes. The note is accepted at a posted value. A small discount is reserved in the mind for the cost of waiting. The drawer closes with a new mix. Coin by weight, paper by date, each counted with distinct care. The household behind the counter feels the difference in the way a budget breathes. Some purchases delayed, some advanced, all adjusted to the rhythm of redemption. To truly understand this shift, watch the arguments that remain calm even when they disagree. A neighbor says depreciation is inevitable. A miller says that taxes pledged will anchor value if collected steadily. A lawyer says precedent exists to support both prudence and bold issuance. The tone is patient because everyone grasps the stakes. Soldiers must be paid without gaps. Suppliers must be placated without insult. Markets must not seize. The solution is not a theory. It is a balance struck by people with conflicting needs who intend to live together next year under the same roofs. Human moments fix the story. A quartermaster hands a folded note to a teamster whose oxen show ribs. The teamster unfolds it, smooths the crease, and asks only whether the date will make it easy to clear against the spring levy. The answer is yes. He nods, pockets the paper, and whistles to his team. A widow selling woolen stockings at a barracks gate takes 2 small notes and 1 coin for change. She keeps the coin for oil, the notes for rent. She presses them flat under a Bible to keep them from curling. Unknown to them, across counting houses where correspondents write with reserve, exchange rates begin to move. Paper trades at a shade less than its face beyond a day's ride, a shade more close to the place of issue. A prudent merchant posts 2 prices, coin and paper. The difference is not insult, it is accommodation. The signs are plain and without scold. Customers choose, and the choice feels like participation rather than judgment. Trust is preserved because the rules are clear and applied evenly. This was the moment everything changed in confidence, not in spectacle. When notes could settle accounts between citizens and then meet taxes on the far side, a loop closed that belonged to no king. The circuit ran through farms, shops, councils, and treasuries, each node visible to the others. A note spent at a stall might return as a portion of a levy and then be cancelled in a book whose margins already hold the memory of damages repaired and roads mended. Paper became a record of shared burdens carried steadily. Let us consider how depreciation sounded in daily life. Prices did not jump, they inched. A loaf cost a fraction more, a bolt of cloth a measured addition. People spoke about it in sums that fit a palm, not in theory that filled a speech. A baker revised a chalkboard and added a line beneath. Paper gladly accepted at the posted rate. A carpenter extended credit to a neighbor for a door repaired before winter. He wrote the amount in paper and scheduled repayment in cordwood and a portion of notes received after the turn of the quarter. The ledger captured a society that could bend without breaking. Meanwhile, across the desks of the National Archives-to-be, resolutions and acts were copied with rows of careful hands. The formulae accumulated, emission authorized, denominations listed, signers appointed.
taxes pledged, counterfeiters warned. Specimens were pasted into volumes with
notes about paper quality and plate wear. The plainness of the record is its strength. It teaches anyone who reads it that value is managed by attention, not by incantation.
What nobody knew at the time was how educational this experiment would be. Households learned to evaluate issuers, to note dates, to triage between coin needed for distant suppliers and paper suitable for local trade. Children watched parents weigh paper as thoughtfully as they weighed flour. Apprentices copied headings, received of, paid to, balance carried forward. The quiet arithmetic seeped into the way people thought about governance. Votes became another kind of note, issued by citizens, redeemed by policy, devalued by negligence, strengthened by honest collection. In the aftermath, soldiers lined up for pay that arrived as a blend. They handled paper without complaint when sutlers honoured it, when taverns posted terms that accepted it, when councils redeemed it on schedule and without favouritism. Counterfeiting was pursued with seriousness, but without panic. Telling signs were taught in taverns as naturally as measures were taught in markets. Trust hardened into habit. In quiet summary, continental currency entered the year like a whisper and left it like a custom. Notes rustled in drawers, crossed counters, settled levies, and returned to be cancelled, each stage recorded in a hand that cared about columns. Paper taught a people how to keep faith in units of ink and time, and that lesson steadied the hand that would soon sign laws meant to last. While notes rustled and coins hesitated, another currency remained sure. Skill passed from hand to hand. We find ourselves in rooms where learning is quiet and precise, where knowledge is measured not in speeches, but in strokes of a pen and the fit of a joint. It is important to remember that capacity, patiently taught, determines whether independence functions when the ink of laws has dried. Let us consider a schoolroom in morning light. Benches hold children who copy lines from a hornbook to a slate, letters forming at a pace the hand can bear. A master sets a line, then steps aside. Syllables are sounded with care, sums added until rows align. The room is plain: chalk, sand, a shelf of readers, an almanac pinned by a nail, and every item points toward reliability. Reading enables the ledger enables trust enables the day. Meanwhile, across a narrow lane, an apprentice crosses a threshold that will shape his life. He places a bundle in a corner and learns the order of tools by their names and places. The pace of instruction is unvaried: sweep, watch, fetch, return, try, file, fit. A journeyman lifts a plane, and the shaving curls like a ribbon that proves the blade is right. There is no lecture on virtue. There is practice in alignment. Boards true to the square become a moral language understood without words. To truly understand this republic of skill, we must first consider the small institutions that house it. Libraries gather in rooms above shops and in back halls of meeting houses. Their catalogues are brief, their hours regular, their rules posted with a simple firmness: return what you borrow, mark your name, do not soil the pages. A surveyor studies a treatise on geometry, then folds the page, pockets a chain, and walks a boundary that will one day be a jurisdiction. The book and the field complete each other. While that was happening at a carpenter's bench, a clerk in training learns the world in columns. He copies headings until they are muscle memory. Debit, credit, received of, paid to, balance carried forward. Ink stains the fingers. Caution steadies the stroke. He checks totals aloud, a habit meant to catch the mind before it drifts. The virtue of a republic appears here as legibility. If numbers can be read without strain, quarrels can be resolved without heat. Unknown to them, across a dockyard, a cooper teaches circles to a boy with a draw knife that must be held just so. Staves are planed to a curve learned by eye. Hoops bite clean. Water poured into a finished barrel does not leak. The lesson is not technically about sovereignty, and yet it is.
When supplies ride long roads and rough seas, containers that do not fail hold a common effort together. Independence benefits from every cask that does its job without complaint.
Let us consider the rhythm of an academy afternoon, where older students pass geography and law with the same calm as arithmetic. A globe turns. A finger traces lines that now have meanings tied to oaths and charters. A passage is read from a digest. The instructor pauses at a clause that has changed, names the change, and invites a question. The tone is steady. It is important to remember that civic language becomes usable when heard in rooms that do not excite the nerves. Meanwhile, across the countryside, guild-like habits persist without grand titles. A smith shop keeps apprentices at the anvil for strikes counted in sets. The master listens for the ring that proves the metal is ready to move. A misstrike is corrected with a nod, not a scold, because the shape must be right and pride distracts. A ploughshare emerges with a clean aris, and a field will turn it into straight furrows. The connection between skill and bread remains plain. What nobody knew at the time was how deeply these routines would equip assemblies to function. Men who can draft a contract that reads cleanly can write a bylaw that can be enforced. Women who keep accounts for households and shops interpret notices with precision and teach their children the same.
Surveyors bring maps that reduce argument to a line drawn under the same sky. Printers trained to justify type teach the eye of a community to expect margins that respect the reader.
Human textures hold it all. Ink-stained fingers flex to keep cramps away. A quill is trimmed with a small knife, the point tested on a thumbnail for give. Tools change hands in a neat exchange. A square passed with the blade open. A chisel offered handle first. A chain lifted without twist. The politeness of tools becomes the politeness of councils. People who can share a bench can share a rule. In the aftermath, the effect appears in small proofs. A bridge repaired to a posted specification holds under flood. A record of births is legible 3 winters later when a dispute requires it. A petition arrives with signatures written by people who know their names as they know their measures. Libraries add 1 volume at a time. Apprentices become journeymen. Journeymen take apprentices. The line continues without drama. In quiet summary, education and apprenticeship form the scaffold that holds every other endeavor in place. Schools shape eyes to read and hands to total. Shops shape wrists to steady and minds to finish tasks. Libraries shape discretion. Workshops shape patience. The Republic is taught at low volume,
in the grain of wood, in the line of a ledger, in the habit of returning what was borrowed, until capacity becomes the quietest and strongest form of independence.
While skills matured at benches and desks, alliances were spoken softly across borders. We find ourselves in a small room lit by a single lamp, where wax warms over coals and paper waits with patient margins. It is important to remember that recognition and credit hinge on manners, timing, and phrasing. The world beyond a harbour does not answer to noise. It answers to signals carried with care. Let us consider the courier before the road. He tests the strap of a satchel, checks a hidden pocket stitched beneath the flap, and feels for the fine grit of sand that will dry a signature if a stop must be made in haste. A letter is folded into a narrow packet, sealed with a simple device, then sealed again with a second mark off to one side, the private counter, and the two together tell a story to a recipient who knows how to read them. The horse stands in shadow. The road holds its ruts like lines in a palm. Meanwhile, across a neutral port, introductions are arranged as if they were pieces fitted in a careful joinery. A name is spoken to a merchant who is trusted by a banker, who is cousin to a clerk, who has the ear of an official, who can promise a meeting. The steps are small and ritualized, a note presented with a bow, a card turned just so, a phrase repeated that proves one belongs to a conversation that values discretion more than display. The stakes are precise: access to loans, to powder, to cloth, to salt, and the tone is the same as a house where children sleep: low, orderly, deliberate. To truly understand this craft, watch the cipher at a desk where a window admits the faintest street noise. A book lies open to a page whose words are not read, but counted. Numbers become letters. Letters become words that point to ships and rates and quantities. A clerk copies the column twice, then compares. The key rests in a second hand at a second table, and the message travels as if it were an ordinary letter to a cousin about harvests. When it arrives, a counterpart reverses the sequence. The skill is patience. The virtue is restraint.
While that was happening, courtesies prepared rooms for promises. A host sets fruit and a pot of chocolate. A decanter waits. Clothes are studied to ensure that one appears neither needy nor proud. The conversation begins at weather and proceeds to maps, then to trade, then to shared inconveniences, and finally, quietly, to terms. A sum is suggested with a tilt of the head that invites rather than demands. A counteroffer moves by an inch, not a leap. A treaty is a piece of furniture assembled over visits. Each tenant must fit. Unknown to them, across quieter desks, insurers and suppliers mark these whispers with penciled notes that later become rates. Reports arrive that a new council pays receipts promptly, that a commissary honors small accounts as faithfully as large, that officers show on time for inspections without ceremony. The impressions lay like tissue between sheets of a ledger, thin but protective, separating rumor from judgment. Credit follows such tissue, not fanfare. Let us consider the human notes. A signet ring leaves a faint, imperfect oval on the edge of wax, enough for one who knows. A courier warms a cold seal in his pocket before pressing to avoid a brittle crack that would alarm. A candle gutters. The wick is trimmed with a nail. The room regains its composure. A clerk pauses before a clause, adds a respectful adverb, removes an adjective that might hurry a friend. In diplomacy, gentleness carries weight. Meanwhile, across a maritime table, neutrality is observed like a Sabbath. Flags declared, cargo lists read with a calm that resists the impulse to search beyond what custom allows.
A nod, a signature, an escort through a channel known to be watched. All granted, because earlier letters used phrases that did not bruise. The ocean listens to manners. Passage is eased by civility that requires no applause.
What nobody knew at the time was how these courtesies would ratify legitimacy before any formal seal arrived. When a minister in one capital praised the regularity of another's accounts, when a banker in a salon remarked that notes from a certain treasury cleared on the day promised, recognition had already begun in practice. Titles could follow, behavior led. In the aftermath, pathways widened, codes were refreshed and passed quietly to new hands. Couriers learned the corners of inns where messages could pass without performance. Promises gained dates. Dates gained the habit of being kept. The tone migrated home into council rooms where motions were phrased to make agreement easy, and into markets where notices spoke softly and were obeyed. In quiet summary, diplomacy in this year is a whisper that carries over distance. Couriers riding at an even pace, codes that hide in plain language, courtesies that open doors. Wax warms, seals press, promises are measured, and the world answers to the mild certainty of people who speak carefully and keep their word. In town after town, governance settles into chairs long occupied, the wood warm from years of use. We find ourselves in a chamber where a long table receives the day's papers, where a window admits a square of gentle light, where the floor knows the path from door to desk by heart. It is important to remember that trash collected, roads mended, and markets inspected are the state as routine, and routine is the quiet form of power. Let us consider the first order of business. A committee that once met ad hoc now names itself council and posts its hours. Elections are called at a pace that fits harvest and ferry schedules. The bylaws read plain: who may vote, where to gather, how to count, when to post results. Oaths are adjusted to the new authority with the same careful hand that copies minutes. A clerk writes "council" in a heading, the ink sinks into familiar paper, and the room breathes as if something found its proper name. Meanwhile, across a street where shop signs creak softly, sheriffs and clerks continue duties with measured alterations. Warrants cite a new source. Fines are recorded under a new column. Receipts carry a different emblem and the same arithmetic. A market inspector checks weights with brass standards that have lived in a drawer longer than any officer's term. The seal on his notice waits to be engraved. His signature suffices for now. People nod, read, obey, and return to their errands untouched by drama. To truly understand how committees become councils, watch the agenda travel from problem to policy. A muddy lane that spoils shoes becomes a posted plan. Assess 2 days of labor per household. Schedule teams by ward. Appoint overseers who know which stones hold best in spring floods. A trash heap near the tannery receives a timetable, a fenced enclosure, and a small stipend for a keeper. The river landing gains rules for mooring, for stacking goods out of the rain, for keeping a narrow passage clear for carts and lit by lanterns at dusk. Authority is the habit of specifying without hectoring. While that was happening in one hamlet's hall, minutes in another are copied with reverent regularity. Names fill columns, present, absent, with a courtesy that records lateness without scorn. Votes are tallied and read back. Motions are seconded by people who once would have deferred to a distant official. Now they defer to procedure, and the procedure makes the room fair. The banker sits beside the cooper, the schoolmaster beside the ferryman. Expertise is invited without becoming pride. The minutes travel by rider to a county clerk, who files them under a label that, though newly cut, rests in a cabinet built years ago. Unknown to them, across the length of the coast, these transformations align neighborhoods like stones set to a plumb line. Road crews touch hands at boundaries and agree on widths. Militia muster rolls fit into county tables without error because the headings match. A small bell in a small town rings on court day because bylaws say it shall, and that sound confirms what paper promised. The effect is accumulation, not announcement. Let us consider how citizens learn new names for old responsibilities. A notice at the meeting house door lists inspectors of leather, measurers of wood, viewers of fences, sealer of weights, and clerk of the market, offices with a past and a future, and now gathered under the heading council. Familiar faces accept the roles with the same deliberate nod that accepted them last year. The difference is the address on the receipt, the direction of a fee, the title spoken when a report is delivered. Change travels wrapped in continuity, and so it is welcomed. Meanwhile, across a river that carries grain and gossip, councils coordinate. Ferries agree on rates to prevent quarrels at the landing. Bridges share a maintenance fund, the ledger kept in one place and read aloud in both. A quarantine rule for ships is harmonized to spare captains confusion and towns disease. The notice is posted with the same ornamental border in each port so that strangers can read with confidence. Coordination is a form of courtesy. It allows work to proceed without friction. What nobody knew at the time was how deeply the tone would train citizens to expect government at a human scale. A woman arrives to register a deed and finds a checklist that keeps her from missing a fee or a signature. A man seeks relief for a neighbor in illness and learns that the poor box has hours and a ledger, that the steward signs for disbursements and publishes totals monthly at the door, that the kindness is careful, because careful kindness lasts. Confidence grows in small increments, recorded in lines that future disputes will bless. Human texture steadies the scene. Benches are polished by decades. Quills are sharpened against the same blade that trims candle wicks. A sandshaker dries a signature. A key on a hook unlocks a drawer whose contents are always returned. The treasurer counts aloud, the clerk repeats, the councillor nods, and the townsman listens. Voices remain low. Every action is legible. Legibility comforts. In the aftermath, seals reappear with new symbols, mounted on handles that fit old hands. A road crew finishes a section and posts a list of lengths completed. A market inspector's report names the scales found light and the fines received without malice. The schoolhouse receives fuel and chalk because the council assigned them in the first month of cold, and the receipt bears a date that proves the foresight. The town grows used to these proofs
and learns to ask for them kindly.
In quiet summary, committees become councils as effort becomes expectation. Elections are held, bylaws adjusted, oaths revised, duties continued. The names change softly, the work endures. The state appears where it has always sat, on a chair, at a table, with a ledger open and a bell that knows when to ring. A sheet is read in a square at midday, and the world does not tilt. It breathes. We find ourselves at the edge of a small crowd that stands as they have stood for notices about roads and markets. Only the heading is new, and the sentences reach further than most. It is important to remember that a celebrated text must become ordinary practice, or it remains a visit from a stranger. Here, it begins to learn the house. Let us consider the reading itself. A voice clear but not theatrical, words paced so the mind has time to place them, clauses that name truths and injuries and intentions. Hats are held at a chest. Children are lifted to see the page, not because they grasp its argument, but because families intend that they will one day read with the same calm. The final lines rest in the air, then settle. A murmur of assent is not applause. It is recognition that a phrase has found a home. Meanwhile, across a lane, a shop door opens and work resumes at a measured tempo. A clerk takes a contract from a drawer and adjusts a heading to fit the new language. The body of the agreement remains the same. Quantities, dates, remedies, signatures. A witness signs with the old steadiness, the pen paused only long enough to enjoy the neatness of a new title. The contract is folded, sealed with wax that holds a different emblem,
and placed with others of the week. The stack looks ordinary, which is the point.
To truly understand how the famous moment enters the day, watch a kitchen table that evening. A broadside lies beside a loaf. A line is read aloud once more, then paraphrased for a younger ear. A mother traces a sentence with a finger and explains that rights are not a storm, but a roof, built and kept. A father says that oaths will change, and that change will ask for the same patience as tying vines in spring. A child copies a single word, liberty, into a copybook, letters a little too tall, but careful. While that was happening in town, a meeting house hosts a gathering with no fanfare beyond a posted notice. The agenda reads, to hear a reading, to appoint a committee to review weights, to schedule repairs to the bridge. The reading is first, the bridge last, and both receive the same attention. A motion to adopt the language for local records passes with ordinary voices, I and I, no need to count. The clerk notes that the form of dates will be adjusted. The constable asks whether seals will arrive. The chair says they will, and the room moves on. Unknown to them, across the coast, printers lay type for copies whose ornaments are modest and whose margins are generous. The work is practical, to ensure that the page can be read in low light, that the lines do not tire the eye, that the paper takes ink evenly so the same page can serve in a square, a parlour, a school. Sheets hang from cords like laundry. The smell of ink sits with the smell of starch. A boy counts off stacks by tens and wraps them in waste paper for the post. Let us consider the human moments that make the text familiar. A young woman pauses at a phrase and smiles because it names a dignity she already feels in her careful work. An older man nods at a list of grievances and thinks of a fee once paid twice. He says nothing aloud, but the line revives a private memory and gives it proper form. A minister lifts one clause on equality and shapes a sermon that will press
Gently on his parish to measure its habits by that measure. The words do not stay on the page. They find chores.
Meanwhile, across a field beyond town, a farmer hears the reading second-hand at dusk. He has no copy and little time, but a neighbor recites what he can, and together they fix on a sentence that will travel back to the soil with them. The next day, the farmer visits the parish chest to see a posted copy. He cannot stay long. He reads a paragraph, bows to the steward, and returns to his fence with a new phrase in his head that will not interfere with work and will not leave it unchanged. What nobody knew at the time was how quietly the text would alter headers and salutations, the small places where people recognize one another. A letter that once began with an elaborate loyalty now opens with a neighborly confidence. A docket page that carried a crown now carries a state. A receipt that once returned thanks to a distant name now returns thanks to the payer and the town. No drum sounds. The change accumulates like lint in a well-swept corner, noticed when the light falls just so. Human textures carry the proof. A child traces letters on a windowsill with fogged breath. A clerk updates a form template with a steady hand, erasing only what must be erased. A tavern keeper chalks a new header on a board and leaves the prices unchanged, not as defiance of the day, but as respect for the week's budget. A cooper raises a cup and toasts without flourish. He names the text and then names his neighbor's good harvest with equal warmth. In the aftermath, language shifts in contracts, sermons, toasts, and minutes, not toward heat, but toward clarity. A people whose mouths already know how to say please and thank you learn how to say we and common purpose with confidence that is not loud. The famous event becomes a habit when it is spoken in rooms where life is already arranged to keep promises. In quiet summary, the declaration passes from square to ledger, from pulpit to pantry, and finds its strength in being repeated at low volume until new words feel like old furniture, useful, well placed, and ready for daily touch. As the famous words settled into ledgers and doorways, the law of the everyday kept its appointments. We find ourselves in a room where a desk faces a window, where paper rests in neat piles, where the scale of justice is measured in signatures rather than speeches. It is important to remember that inheritance, partnership, and custody, maintained with minimal disruption, keep fear from the door. Let us consider a contract drawn on a weekday afternoon. Two neighbors sit across a table worn by generations of elbows. The clerk reads in a level voice: quantity, quality, price, date, remedy. A single phrase in the heading has changed to name a new authority. The rest of the form holds. Witnesses stand, nod, sign. A seal will come later. For now, the names and the habit of enforcement do the work. The document is folded with care, docketed, and placed in a bundle tied by month. Meanwhile, across a quieter parlour, a will is set down with a steadiness that reassures a house. The testator names a spouse, children, a cousin who has always helped with haying, a neighbour entrusted to oversee a small legacy for a child not yet of age. The language is familiar, sound mind, proper witnesses, residue to be distributed. A clerk writes the date with the new style, pauses, writes it again, and continues. The law's calm flows through the quill into the room. Grief finds structure here. Property finds its course. Quarrels are prevented by sentences that know where to end. To truly understand how continuity works, watch the clerk adjust the smallest details. A printed form bears an emblem that once crowned the top line. A strip of paper covers it for now. The heading above is written in a practiced hand. Fees remain marked in the margin and paid at the window, coin or paper accepted per the posted notice. Receipts are issued with their familiar phrasing, the line thanking the payer resting under the new office name. The change travels on a track that everyone already trusts. While that was happening, writs were reissued with dates to match court terms that did not miss a beat. Summonses carried through streets by constables who knew which doors to knock and at what hour to find a man at home. Bonds were recognized, guardians appointed, apprentices indentured with the same clauses that protected both the boy and the master. The docket did not expand to hold noise, it expanded to hold life, recorded plainly. Unknown to many, shelves of probate and deed books grew page by page, each volume labelled with a year that anchored memory. A marriage contract was placed beside a deed that moved a boundary by a chain and a half. A petition for relief sat behind a guardianship that named a woman as careful steward. An inventory of a small estate listed tools with prices that showed a community could value skill as well as land. The books were heavy and comforting. They taught a town that promises had addresses. Let us consider the human textures. Parchment rustles with a slow confidence when unfolded. Wax warms over a small taper, pooled and pressed, the impression firm even without an elaborate device. The clerk's voice is gentle when a widow hesitates at a clause. He reads it again, slower. A witness adjusts spectacles, leans forward, traces a line with a finger he washed before entering the room. The air is ordinary, and that is its power.
Meanwhile, across the county, notice boards keep their rhythm. Court days posted, petition hours named, filing fees listed with the kindness of clarity. The poor are instructed how to apply without shame. The debtor learns how to schedule repayment. The partner who wishes to dissolve an agreement reads the steps and knows the path will be fair. Printed guidance from digests lies open on the desk, corners turned down where precedent steadies the hand. The law shows its face as a timetable. What nobody knew at the time was how this quiet security would brace larger changes. A shop's lease renewed under the new style made it possible to hire an apprentice and take orders with confidence. A farm's boundary affirmed without quarrel freed 2 families to share a plough team in spring. A guardianship properly notarized allowed a young person to be apprenticed and a skill to travel to a town that needed it. Each entry was small. Together, they were the spine of a life. In the aftermath, disputes were resolved with familiar procedures. Notice given, parties heard, findings entered, times for appeal posted. The tone remained measured. A constable's return was legible. A clerk's hand was unmistakable after years of practice. A judge, title adjusted, spoke as before, careful, brief, mindful that clarity is mercy. People left with papers tucked flat in coat linings and aprons,
relieved by the weight. In quiet summary, standardized forms were adjusted, witnesses affirmed, records stored with care. Expectations stabilized because the law moved at a walking pace, through rooms everyone knew, under headings that shifted without shaking the table. The comfort of a docket number, the feel of folded parchment, the steady voice at the desk. These were the quiet securities by which independence learned to last. As the docket closed and the shop door latched, the market's quiet grammar moved into kitchens and yards. We find ourselves where budgets are written in chalk and wiped with sleeves, where a pot simmer keeps time for arithmetic done in the head. It is important to remember that grand theories arrive at the hearth as small choices. Let us consider a morning list. A household notes flour low, candles near spent, shoes thin at the toes. The ledger whispers priorities. Mend first, then buy, then postpone. A woman chooses course meal over fine, saving 3 coins for lamp oil as nights lengthen. A man tightens a strap rather than replacing it, planning to purchase leather only when the next wagon is due. The invisible hand here is not mystery. It is the comfort of fitting needs to a purse without shame. Meanwhile, across a lane, a baker scans the hour and the weather, adjusting loaves by the expected footfall when rain keeps carts home. He prices by the margin that will keep apprentices fed and the oven warm. A penny earned today is weighed against a customer kept for winter, so the crust is generous and the tally small. Habit teaches him that steady demand prefers kindness. Profit preserves itself by avoiding corners that bruise. To truly understand the rhythm, watch substitution at work. Tea thins with a pinch of dried mint, sugar stretches with molasses. A stew welcomes barley when meat runs dear. None of it feels like loss, because it is done with intention and explained at the table with the unhurried logic of seasons. Children learn that price is a story told by distance, scarcity, and time, and that thrift is listening well. While that was happening in town, wages set themselves like water seeking level. A cooper, in demand after harvest, asks a rate he would not in spring. A tailor, facing fewer weddings, trims his price and offers quicker delivery. The terms are spoken plainly, the handshake steady. Everyone knows the week's complexion. The calendar and the crowd write the contract together. Unknown to them, across oceans, silver, charts, and engines set the backdrop. The hearth responds without fuss. A list on a pantry door is reordered. A purchase delayed until the convoy is sighted. A repair brought forward because rain will stop work next week. Time is joined to prudence, and prudence softens risk. Human textures hold the lesson. A candle counted before dusk, a clock wound after prayers, a scrap of cloth saved for a patch, a note in a margin, bought when cheaper, hold for winter. Neighborhoods coordinate without meeting. A price whispered at the pump, a nod at the market that says, wait 2 days. In quiet summary, the invisible hand feels like ordinary care, choosing suppliers, adjusting wages, substituting goods, delaying purchases, so that households keep faith with budgets and with one another, and the year moves forward with a calm that work, price and time compose together. Markets need measurement. Science steadies the hand, and we find ourselves where lengths and lines give shape to trust. It is important to remember that standard measures make trade fair and navigation safe, and that fairness, like safety, quiets the mind. When a yard is a yard wherever the yardstick rests, a bargain can be kept without argument. When a mile means the same to both surveyor and traveller, a promise of distance does not fray on the road. Let us consider a lane at first light, a chain uncoiled and clicking on stones as it is laid. Two surveyors walk the length, one counting links, the other marking with a rod. The pace is unhurried, the numbers spoken softly, the notes entered in a book that has learned rain and dust without complaint. Boundary stones are set where figures agree, and the sight of them calms neighbours who remember winters of doubt. A fence will follow, a hedge will grow, a field will be tilled without quarrel because the angles are now shared. Meanwhile, across a table in a counting house, a map opens with a patient sigh. Coasts traced, inlets named, soundings dotted like a measured whisper. A compass settles on a chart. Its needle seeks north with a fidelity that asks for nothing and gives much. A pair of dividers touches two ports and steps the distance along a scale tuned to a known degree. The merchant does not guess. He infers. Cargo is scheduled. Insurance is discussed in numbers that let an underwriter sleep. The world shrinks to something a ledger can hold because the lines can be trusted. To truly understand the geometry of calm, watch the instruments at work in small hands. A carpenter's square, true against the light, lowers to a board and makes a corner that will not warp. A mason's plumb drops from a string and finds gravity's quiet instruction, setting stones that will resist water and time. A miller checks a rule worn smooth by use, adjusting the gap between stones until the flour falls like a soft snow. The measures do not argue. They inform, they align, they save effort tomorrow by being precise today. While that was happening at home, coasts and rivers were being read with a similar patience. Almanacs appeared with tides predicted, eclipses calculated, distances between towns corrected by riders who counted hoofbeats, then verified by surveyors who counted links. The calm of a road well measured shows itself when a wagon sets out at dawn and arrives exactly at the hour posted on the tavern door. The innkeeper's ledger knows how many beds to warm. The cook knows how much to prepare. The town aligns around arrival like a clock welcomes a hand. Unknown to them, farther out where the horizon curves, the ocean absorbed this order. Mariners checked longitude and latitude with instruments that felt like companions. Noon sights were taken, angles were logged, courses were adjusted by degrees rather than hunches. Charts refined by careful observers reduced uncertainty. Safer routes made commerce steadier. Steadier commerce set prices at levels households could plan against. A captain promised a window of landfall and met it often enough that his word gained weight beyond the dock. Let us consider how measurement settles disputes. Two farmers meet with a chain, a copy of a prior survey, and a willingness to accept the line once found. They walk together, they mark together, they return home with the same figures in both minds. A mill's duty to keep a headrace clear is not argued in temper, but checked against a width posted years before. A town marks out a common, posts the dimensions, and finds that polite use follows precise boundaries. The geometry acts as a mediator, sparing tempers and saving time. Meanwhile, Across print shops, almanacs and small maps roll from presses, their tables neat, their symbols explained in margins that teach without pride. A farmer plans sowing by moon and weather, but also by the distance to a market measured once and confirmed by the new road markers that appear at intervals. A merchant reads of shoal depths noted by soundings and lowers his risk by choosing a slightly longer route whose figures inspire confidence. Numbers guide as gently as a hand on a shoulder. Human textures make it visible. Chains click and then lie quiet in grass. Compasses settle with a small tremble and then point with composure. Chalk marks lines that rain cannot erase because the line has been transferred to wood, to stone, to agreement. Fingers trace roots on paper. Lips count quietly. A pencil taps twice on a margin when a figure balances. People trust what they can repeat, and measures are the most repeatable kindness the age could offer. What nobody knew at the time was how strongly these standards would root independence in shared practice. When boundaries drawn became jurisdictions honored, councils could plan roads that met, bridges that connected, and markets that synchronized. When ships sailed on charts that spoke the same language from one port to another, correspondents could promise arrivals, and credit could grow on the expectation that goods and news would keep time. When households counted candles, yards of cloth, and bushels by units that matched the notices at the market and the entries in the court, the private and the public converged into one steady rhythm. In the aftermath, disputes diminished by a margin that felt like grace. A chain's length removed the need for a raised voice. A posted tide table spared a captain a guess that would have cost a cargo. A boundary set at right angles allowed a plough to turn cleanly, saving a horse's strength for winter. Confidence thickened like cream. People arranged their days around numbers that behaved, and their trust migrated into the institutions that kept those numbers true. In quiet summary, measurement, maps, and standards drew a gentle grid under life, surveying roads, marking boundaries, printing reliable almanacs and charts, so that disputes eased, voyages steadied, and timetables gained meaning. The geometry of calm let strangers transact as neighbors, and let neighbors plan as if tomorrow would arrive on time. And so it did. As the lines on maps held and the year leaned toward cold, we find ourselves in the season that asks less for motion than for measure. It is important to remember that endurance preserves plans and shortages test trust, and that winter is the time when a community learns how well it counted the months before. The pace lowers, the soundscape softens, decisions narrow to what must last and who must be kept warm. Let us consider the pantry first. A door opens to shelves that answer questions without words. Jars stand in rows, dried beans, salted pork, apples wrinkled to sweetness. A cloth covers a crock where butter sleeps in brine. The tally sits in a mind that has been adding since harvest. How many loaves can be baked before the flour runs thin? How much wood keeps a room temperate and a kettle productive? How to stretch a candle's life so a ledger can be closed by lamplight without waste. The winter list is not a fear, it is an agenda. A hand writes, ration to the turn of the month, mend what can be mended, share where sharing keeps both households whole.
Meanwhile, across a lane where footsteps sound like felt against stone, the woodpile becomes a calendar.
Logs stacked in cords translate cold into days. A boy counts rows. An elder tests dryness by the ring of a split. The stove is fed not by impulse but by plan. Morning fuel heavier, afternoon lighter, evening embers banked so the dawn can be woken with a small breath. Tools are inspected because breakdowns in frost cost more. A hinge oiled, a latch tightened, a bucket hoop tapped down against shrinkage. Patience walks through the yard in a wool cap and pauses at each task until the future feels accounted for. To truly understand wintering, we must first consider the letters it sends and receives. Roads slush, then harden. Riders time their departures by the thaw's brief generosity. In parlours and counting houses, pens move over paper that curls near the fire. Supplies delayed are acknowledged with courtesy. Promises are adjusted by days, not by tone. A partner writes that molasses will arrive after the next moon if ice spares the river mouth. A quartermaster records that rations will include more cornmeal and fewer fresh vegetables until the roads open. People nod, adapt, and keep their voices low. While that was happening in town, the countryside gathered its quiet economies. Neighbours met at a shared fence to exchange labour instead of coin. An afternoon's help splitting wood traded for 3 sacks of feed. A wagon loaned in return for a day at the saw pit when thaw returns. The terms are simple and written in the way the work is done, not on paper. A woman with a brisk manner and warm hands visits 2 homes with a basket of stockings knit in evenings when conversation moved like a slow river. She sells 3 pairs, gifts 1, and carries news about a neighbour's illness that becomes a list of small errands volunteered without ceremony. Unknown to them, farther out where the ocean carries its own winter, ships reduce sail and ride weather with a patience taught by years. Captains watch barometers and clouds like readers of long novels. Entries in the log shorten to the essentials: wind, sea, course, hope for a sighting. In ports that do not freeze, men coil ropes with a particular care, knowing that a stiff line weakens when it is needed most. Winter, even at sea, is a lesson in restraint. Let us consider the market under frost. Stalls thin but do not vanish. Root vegetables heap like modest treasures. Salt fish hangs blue-grey in the shade. Prices shift to reflect scarcity without punishing need, because sellers intend to see the same faces in spring. A posted notice reminds all that paper will be redeemed for levies on schedule. The reminder quiets the discount some feared. A shopkeeper unrolls cloth for a mother who means to line a child's shoes. He finds a remnant at a price that preserves both dignity and warmth. Faces are wrapped. Conversation is brief. The exchange feels like friendship disguised as commerce. Meanwhile, across a barracks where breath clouds in the morning, provisioning becomes a steady craft. Logs arrive in a rhythm agreed weeks before. Rations are weighed, not guessed. A ledger notes units per man per day, with columns for substitutions so that a meal is balanced even when ingredients change. A soldier writes home that the bread is coarse but the fire is steady, that a sergeant checks on those whose gloves are thin, that the pay came in paper and is accepted at the tavern where a stew can be had for less if a man helps chop wood on the side. Morale holds when systems hold. Human textures keep the season from becoming only a test. A seam is reinforced by lamplight. A child's book is copied by hand to make a second set of letters for a cousin. A tune is hummed while a kettle simmers.
a thread pulled through cloth with a sound like snow brushed from a sill. The indoors grows smaller and kinder. Chairs are repaired. A table's wobble is corrected and then admired each evening for its new steadiness. Time stretches, but it is filled. What nobody knew at the time was how much governance learned in winter. Councils read their own bylaws with fresh eyes and found where a clause could be sharpened. Inspectors of weights checked standards when the market was quiet and discovered a scale off by an ounce that no one had noticed in summer's rush. Schoolmasters planned next terms with an attention not possible when fields demanded boys' hands.
A small road crew mended a culvert under frost so spring water would not cut the lane again. Winter made planners of everyone.
Let us consider scarcity where it arrived hardest. A cupboard thins, a purse lies flat, a family faces a week where hunger would leave a mark. The town's posted system responds. The steward of the poor box opens the ledger, notes the request, and issues assistance without stigma because the rules are known and the funds were planned for this season. A neighbor brings 2 jars and a loaf and speaks of it
As an exchange, not a gift. He received help last year with a lame ox, and the balance now returns. Dignity survives where procedures are gentle.
Meanwhile, across parlours where maps have gathered dust under winter's patience, people trace routes for spring. Merchants pencil shipping windows. Farmers align sowing with likely thaw. A mason schedules work when mortar will set. A minister plans visits to households where grief or debt has lingered. A school committee lists repairs to be made before the first day. The season pauses bodies and frees minds to arrange next steps with care. In the aftermath of the coldest nights, mornings redeem. The first drip from an eave sounds like a promise. A door opens to air that no longer bites. A road bears footprints where a week ago snow erased all evidence of movement. Work resumes in small experiments. A cart rolled to the lane's bend and back, tools carried out and set on a bench to remember their weight. A fence tapped with a mallet to note where frost heave lifted a post out of true. The pause lifts. Plans become tasks again. In quiet summary, wintering in this year is patience practiced as provision, stockpiling, rationing, repairing, and writing the letters that keep distant obligations tender. Towns learn to stretch, families share, councils plan the spring with lists that feel like kindness.
The long pause does not halt the year. It deepens it, so that when thaw arrives, the hands that lift shutters and loosen boats have already agreed on what to do next.
As winter loosens its hold, we find ourselves widening the lens until the year shows its threads. It is important to remember that independence sits within currents of empire, economy, and science, and that choices made in quiet rooms on one shore are balanced by forces working with equal quiet across oceans. The web holds. No one stands alone. Let us consider Spain's mountains first, where silver drawn from deep earth travels in guarded lines to ports that feel its weight before they count it. Bars marked by assay and crown move from strong rooms to holds, then ride west and west again, meeting markets that accept value most easily when it is heavy and bright. In Manila's humid air, galleons collect cargoes, their decks creaking under a traffic that translates metals into silk, porcelain, and tea. Silver does not argue about borders. It finds demand and settles there, and in that settling,
It sets prices that ripple back to towns that will never see the mines. Meanwhile, across the breadth of the Qing Empire, a clerk opens a ledger in a tea warehouse and balances it with coins that traveled half a world without needing a translator. Hard currency smooths exchange where trust is measured by weight. The entry is brief and confident. The price that results is not an abstract figure. It is a line that will guide a shopkeeper's chalkboard in a port thousands of miles away. A tin of leaves is dearer by a margin that a careful household will notice and adjust to with the same composure it applies to all such shifts. The web is taut, and the tug is felt with a delay that teaches patience. To truly understand how this ties to a year on American shores, we must first consider Britain's humming workshops. Engines in smoky halls turn steadily, pistons proofed by men who count strokes as naturally as they count their breath. Cotton twists into thread, iron cools into shapes that repeat with new fidelity. The effect is not noise but reliability. When cloth arrives on schedule and to standard, merchants write letters that read like promises kept. Insurance rates find a lower shelf and rest there. The colonies take notice because order that arrives predictably is as persuasive as argument. While that was happening, France's salons gather minds that turn polished sentences into frameworks for policy. Conversations about rights and representation produce a climate where sympathy for an experiment across the ocean grows in the same way a vine leans toward light. A hostess lifts an eyebrow. A minister listens. A banker calculates risk. A philosopher finds language that dignifies practical needs.
The salon does not write a treaty, but it makes room for one, and the room is measured in tone as much as in policy.
Unknown to them, in harbours that speak Dutch and in counting houses where ledgers open left to right and right to left, neutrality writes its own advantage. Goods move under flags that offend no one. Credit extends to clients whose behaviour suggests they will keep dates and calm ships. A captain who speaks in measured terms finds anchorage when a more belligerent colleague is turned back with a polite wave.
The web rewards those who behave as if the world were a library with many quiet rules.
Let us consider the British Isles again, where debate proceeds through pamphlets and parliament, through sermons and tavern rounds. The empire weighs cost against custom, pride against pragmatism. Navy lists expand, convoy schedules harden. Policy is printed with clauses that expect obedience, but the Atlantic answers with weather, with private arrangements, with distance that covers improvisation like snow covers tracks. Messages cross and miss. Decisions follow news that has already grown old in its packet. The web stretches. It does not break. Meanwhile, across the interior of the Americas, Spanish missions and French outposts, British forts and indigenous towns negotiate paths that rarely appear on the grand line drawings pinned in capital offices. Fur moves with the seasons. Alliances are affirmed by gifts and gestures that mean more than decrees. The colonies that speak of independence occupy only a portion of this map, and their choices send ripples that must coexist with other rhythms, some older, some stronger, all deserving acknowledgement. It is important to remember that humility is a form of accuracy. What nobody knew at the time was how strongly observation, not proclamation, would support the year's undertakings. Cook's careful measurements, printed and shared, shortened voyages, and narrowed the band of risk captains would accept. Smith's patient reasoning, bound and sold, taught merchants and magistrates to trust in patterns that emerge from countless transactions rather than from single commands. Spanish silver's global patience steadied accounts that would otherwise have toppled. French salons' warmth toward new arrangements eased the way for loans that would be signed with wax warmed in very quiet rooms. The web's calm secured the year's bolder phrases. Human textures make the network visible. A map is spread on a table. Fingers trace routes that never meet and yet influence one another like threads in a fabric. A ledger copied in Amsterdam includes a line for a shipment whose final destination sits under a different crown, entered with a neutrality that feels like wisdom. A letter written in Paris comments on a pamphlet from London and a report from Boston with equal attention, and then asks for tea that will arrive with silver that left the Andes months ago. The distance between these moments collapses into the space between sentences. Let us consider how policy learns from this web. A tariff proposed in one house must consider cloth woven elsewhere on gears that do not pause for opinion. A plan to fund a road learns to respect a river's preference for certain banks and a town's habit of market day. A council thinking of credit terms remembers a banker's face in a port across an ocean and writes dates that will satisfy both the mule that carries grain to the dock and the insurer who expects reliability like a tide. The web trains its participants. Meanwhile, across printing presses that slap ink onto paper with the same patient rhythm as oars in a harbour, documents travel. The Avalon Project's ancestors, compilations of charters, treaties, laws, are not yet gathered in a single place, but their originals live in drawers and chests and offices, their language shaping agreements far away. The World Digital Library will one day bring these sheets onto a single pane of light. For now, copies walk in satchels and lie in trunks, and the world they describe moves by their lines as a ship moves by a chart. In the aftermath of so much quiet motion, clarity becomes a virtue that stands taller than bravado. Policies are framed with awareness of distant causes. A council that calculates a levy for spring does so with a sense of a ship's departure from Cadiz, of a salon's conversation in Paris that might sweeten a loan, of a chart corrected in Tahiti that will make a convoy's landfall more likely to keep its week. Distant rooms become neighbours. The sense that the year is a web, not a stage, settles like dust that shows the pattern of a beam in sunlight. In quiet summary, the world in reflection reveals a network: Spain's silver, Britain's engines, France's salons, China's demand, where independence learns to place itself among currents rather than above them. Maps spread on tables, fingers trace routes, and policy grows modest and precise, aware that every promise must be kept within a web that prefers steadiness to spectacle. As Thor returns to roads and doors open wider, routines step forward with the assurance of things long rehearsed. We find ourselves where councils meet without fuss, where courts sit on schedule, where schools ring their bells at the hour agreed. It is important to remember that endurance of courts, markets, schools and councils is the measure by which a year's declarations become a decade's habits. Let us consider the morning the town hall receives its new seal. The handle fits the hand as the old one did. The emblem differs. The pressure required is the same. A clerk warms the wax, presses once, lifts, examines the edge for a clean line, and places the impression on a receipt that pays a road crew for lengths completed. The proof is not the symbol, it is the ease with which the symbol enters the day's work. Titles have normalized. The treasurer signs below with the same compact hand that has balanced columns since before the headings changed. Meanwhile, across a schoolroom where spring light reaches the back benches, lessons resume at their measured pace. Children copy dates in the new style without ceremony. An instructor reads a short passage on oaths and duty, then turns to arithmetic because arithmetic is what keeps a ledger straight and a store honest. A slate is raised, a sum approved, a smile passes without comment. Institutions show their health when they can absorb change without breaking stride. To truly understand how confidence becomes custom, watch the sequence by which a market opens. A bell notes the hour. Scales, checked by a sealer last week, balance true. A posted notice lists fair prices for staples based on supply, not on sentiment. Sellers greet buyers by name. Paper and coin mingle in drawers according to the terms already agreed in winter. A constable strolls the lane, nodding to an inspector of measures who carries a small box of brass standards that feel as reassuring in the hand as they look on the table. Nothing in the scene asks for applause, and that is the point. While that was happening, a court convenes and closes with a rhythm that comforts. Docket called, cases heard, findings entered, times for appeal read aloud. A judge pauses to thank a jury for service rendered, not with ceremony, but with the calm acknowledgement that shared duty binds neighbours. A dispute over a boundary is resolved by reference to a survey measured in links and rods, and two men shake hands in a corridor where the light falls evenly on both faces. The record is signed, folded, shelved. The shelf grows heavier by exactly one proceeding, and the community grows lighter by exactly one worry. Unknown to them, in quiet offices beyond the town, archives begin their long work. Resolutions, acts, charters, and minutes find their places in volumes where they will be able to answer questions for people not yet born. A librarian makes an index entry and by so doing makes the future more legible. A printer supplies a second copy of a bylaw to a neighbouring village that asked for the wording. The sharing feels like a handshake across a river. Institutions breathe better when documents circulate. Let us consider the human moments that show roots taking hold. A midwife's license is renewed under the new heading, and mothers in her care never pause to ask whose emblem certifies her skill. A ferrymaster posts hours and keeps them, and the bridge committee across the way records progress and delays with equal candour. A church vestry adopts the town's measurements for repairs so invoices can pass between hands without translation. A militia quartermaster balances last month's ration returns, the figures neat, the signatures clear, the supplies accounted for to the pound. The state, such as it is, appears everywhere as steady handwriting. Meanwhile, across committees that last year called themselves temporary, procedures have settled. Motions are phrased in ways that ease agreement. Reports arrive on time because authors build them into their weeks. Vacancies are filled without drama because the list of willing hands lengthens as confidence grows. A road plan includes stones already purchased and teams already scheduled, so approval feels like recognizing work done rather than authorizing work imagined. The town, the county, the colony turned state. Each scale shows the same preference for tasks that begin where agreements end.
What nobody knew at the time was how swiftly symbols would feel native once backed by dependable routines. Seals reappear with new emblems, mounted on handles that have known years of wrists. Receipts adopt new headers. Schools add a line to morning recitations. Councils keep a small box for returned notes cancelled and saved for audit. Confidence becomes custom when people expect order and receive it, when the calendar and the ledger reflect one another like a clock reflected in a window. In the aftermath, a bell is rung for closing, a door locked, a candle snuffed. The town sleeps under new names and old stars. In quiet summary, routines have solidified, titles have normalized, seals impress cleanly, and the work that mattered before independence continues after it with a steadier breath. Confidence becomes custom. Custom becomes law. Law finds its home in rooms that do not raise their voices. Independence unfolded like a tide, steady and assured, shaping habits more than headlines and turning declarations into daily work that lasted. If this quiet exploration brought you a moment of peace, consider subscribing for more journeys into history and join us for the next reflection.